Welcome back, everyone here in the room in Dublin. And welcome back, everyone who's joining us via Zoom. And I want to, in particular, welcome Maria Pearson, who's one of our beloved fellows of Cohort 3. She's in Argentina, and we miss her very much in person, but we're really glad that she can Zoom in with us today. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our fellow Cynthia Mulholland, whose presentation will be called Free and Equal, an Australian Conversation on Human Rights. Cynthia lives in the Hunter Valley in Australia. She is currently working in a communications position for the Institute of Sisters of Mercy, Australia and Papua New Guinea, ISMA PNG. She has a background in communications and community development and is passionate about finding solutions to and raising awareness of injustice. Cynthia's Mercy journey started in 2015 when she was appointed as the manager for Sacred Spaces Singleton, a ministry of ISMA PNG based at the Singleton Convent. Cynthia is an active member of Australian Catholic Religious Against Trafficking in Humans, ACRAF, and looks forward to continuing to develop her skills in advocacy and raising awareness about human trafficking and modern slavery. On a personal level, Cynthia has thoroughly enjoyed exploring mercy spirituality and how it relates to justice in caring for people who are vulnerable and marginalized. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you, Chris, for that lovely introduction. To begin, I just want to acknowledge that in Australia this week, it is NAIDOC Week, and it's a week that we celebrate the history, culture and achievements of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Indigenous people here and on the country that I live, which is Wonnarua. And in Wonnarua, I say Anaganya Kimbai, which is welcome friends. So here we go. When starting out on this journey, this 12-month journey, we were informed that we would be required to undertake a research project. Well, I don't mind telling you that the words research project sent a chill through my body. What could I possibly hope to achieve in that time? I knew I couldn't find a cure for climate change. I couldn't put an end to homelessness. So what could I do? The answer came slowly, but it was still profound nonetheless. Sister Paula Anamani, she remained at our side throughout this whole journey, and she provided my first answer. In response to my apprehension about undertaking a research project, she gave me some very wise advice. She said, don't think of it as a research project. Just ask yourself, what social justice message does the Mercy world need to hear? Well, with those words ringing in my ear, I set out to find my social justice message. Well, it turns out there are many social justice messages that I wanted the Mercy world to hear. There's the Raise the Age campaign in Australia. This campaign is working towards raising the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 14. Think about that. That's 10 years old that they can be imprisoned. And we want to bring this up to 14 so that it's in line with the United Nations. Then there's the defending the right to protest. 3 states in Australia have introduced new laws that erode the rights of protesters and threaten them with jail time. Many anti-protest laws have been specifically designed to curb environmental activism. And then there's also the campaign for a national compensation scheme for survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking. This campaign is trying to implement a single national compensation scheme that would replace our 8 state-based schemes. And then what about a Charter of Rights for Australia? So as I was struggling with trying to focus on one social justice message, when all I wanted to do was share these messages and more, along came my second answer by way of Sister Angela Reid. Sister Angela just quietly suggested that if I focused on the Charter of Rights, also called the Human Rights Act of Australia, then all the other messages would come under that umbrella. And she was so right. This set me off on my journey to learn more and to share that knowledge with others. So today, my social justice message that I want the Mercy Well to hear is really quite simple. Australia needs to adopt a Human Rights Act. With the unwavering support of my mentor, Sister Liz Callan, I set about to create a video explaining this important issue and asking people, if Australia had a Human Rights Act, how would that make a difference to your ministry? So I'm hoping that my video will encourage all Australians to start a conversation about human rights in our country. But let me tell you a bit about this important issue. Despite the protection of human rights being fundamental to our way of life, people in Australia are still vulnerable to abuse. Many live with their basic rights breached on a daily basis. For example, from 2016 to 2019, the Morrison government in Australia issued 450,000 unlawful and incorrect robo-debts. A Royal Commission into the scheme revealed that decisions in the scheme's administration were made without due consideration of human rights impacts on vulnerable Australians. Then there's the findings of the Aged Care Royal Commission in 2021. This laid bare the abuses so many older people in Australia under the late aged care systems. A Human Rights Act would protect our rights in laws so older people and their families can challenge abuses and ensure the right to a safe, high-quality care and services, to always be treated with dignity and respect, and to enjoy their lives in freedom and safety. Australia is the only liberal democracy in the world that does not have a Charter of Rights or a national act that explains what people's basic rights are and how they can be protected. Anti-discrimination laws protect people's rights to live free from discrimination, but if you're denied rights such as healthcare or education, there's no framework to challenge an injustice. While some states do have a Human Rights Act, without one enshrined in our federal law, there's no way to challenge an injustice when human rights violations occur. The government is failing to protect, respect and fulfil human rights as its responsibility under international law. An Australian Human Rights Act will ensure that values that we all share, like fairness, respect, dignity and compassion, are always at the heart of our government decisions, laws and policies, including health, housing, education and caring for the elderly. It's time to build a fairer Australia where our fundamental human rights are fully protected. But don't take my word for it. Let's watch the video.
Well, I think that at base, human rights is not a particularly difficult subject. It's about the basic dignity and respect for every human being. Why it matters so much for us in Australia is that we have become quite isolationist, exceptionalist in failing to have the legal tools in place to allow the courts to provide a check and balance against the growing and unprecedented power of government. And we've seen that recently, and I'm sure we'll come back to that later this evening. But my key point is that if we had a legislated Charter of Rights that will protect children, protect juveniles in the criminal justice system, protect asylum seekers and refugees, protect older people against elder abuse, ensure that we all get medical care that we need. If we had provisions that protected those rights, then the courts would have the tools to stand up against governments that are failing to respect those rights in far too many cases.
I think it just comes down to, all of us have the same human rights. I think the dilemma in Australia is there's just this lack of accountability in being able to enforce those rights. But I just think that it comes back to the point, people are now having more discussion about this because we can no longer rely on the politicians to respect our rights. So it comes back to the people being able to enforce them and be accountable. And in order to get that legislative charter, the people must have a say and push for that themselves.
So I think, and just going back to the premise of why human rights matter as well, and picking up on both Gillian and Tila's points, we see every day at the Commission people who have felt excluded or disconnected or have been discriminated against on the basis of some attribute. And I think human rights, you can talk about human rights in a philosophical, legal or moral sense. As a lawyer, I tend towards the legal, but they all overlap. And when you start to talk about rights, you start to engage the concept of obligations and accountability. And that's why I think they are such a powerful tool, because the morality of human rights and the idea that everyone is born free and equal and should be treated with respect, dignity, freedom and equality, we can't, and history has shown this, we can't depend on governments or individuals to self-regulate in that way. So this is about a powerful system of checks and balances. The stories that we hear are that human rights matter if you are a parent who has a child that has a disability and is being discriminated or treating very poorly at school. They matter if you're someone who's putting a parent into aged care and you're concerned about the treatment that person is going to receive. They matter if you're the 1 in 3 women who will be sexually harassed at work during your lifetime. They matter if you're a gay man who wants to teach at a religious school. So these are all everyday examples of where an all-encompassing rights framework would assist not just in the development of policy, but also where rights are breached, that there is a remedy.
A Human Rights Act would mean that we place into our law the human rights standards that we promise the world that we would uphold. Things like making sure everyone has a secure place to call home, everyone's able to see a doctor when they're not well, regardless of their bank balance. Every child has a quality school education, regardless of their postcode. Those rights, health, housing, education, should be in our laws alongside rights like the right to have peaceful assembly, the freedom of association, freedom of expression. Also cultural rights are an important area as well. All of those human rights and more should be in in law, so that it's improving government decision making, because governments have to be considering human rights standards when they're making laws, policies or running services. But also, people have the ability to take action when their rights are not being respected.
I'd like to read a letter from a young person who was one of those who was imprisoned in Barwon. I know I've stuffed up. I've done things I'm not proud of, and so I've spent time locked up. I don't know why it was me that got sent to Barwon. It is an adult prison. For me, Barwon was the worst place I have ever seen. There was no hope for the future. It was just surviving each day.
It was critical that we took action here. We spoke with the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service. We're particularly concerned about Aboriginal children. Children as young as 15 being transferred from an age-appropriate youth justice facility to extremely harsh, oppressive conditions, unsafe for children in a maximum security adult jail. We had seen governments do this in Western Australia, transferring kids to an adult jail. We'd seen it with the horrors of Dondale, with the Northern Territory government transferring children to an adult jail. Legal challenges against those actions failed. In Victoria, they succeeded, and they succeeded because of the Charter of Human Rights. The Charter of Human Rights was absolutely critical in providing power for people to take action to protect their human rights. And the evidence we were seeing and hearing was of really inhumane conditions, completely inappropriate for children. Children being in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, handcuffed when they were leaving their cells. There were allegations of assaults from guards. At least one child was hospitalised. Capsicum spray was used in a closed environment there. Children who were supposed to be accessing rehabilitation service and education in particular were not receiving those proper services. And so the Charter of Human Rights guarantees the right to humane treatment when someone's detained, when they're locked up, and it guarantees the protection of the best interests of children. And so based on those two human rights and based on other legal arguments, we worked with the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and other partners and pro bono lawyers to bring cases in the Supreme Court challenging the government's actions.
When I heard that the case had been won, I was delighted. Each one of these cases that we win means that a more decent society is possible.
Charters of human rights, what they do is they embed shared values of equality, freedom, respect, dignity and compassion at the heart of government decision-making. So they have to think human rights before they act. That's where charters play their critical role. They prevent human rights abuses from happening in the first place, and if governments still do violate human rights, they give people the power to take action to protect their human rights.
In my community, the human rights that I think are missing are to do with health concerns that are caused by ecological damage. So environmental damage is going on in the form of gold mining in our area. And there are a number of gold mines. There's one that is the biggest in the world. It's one of the top 3 biggest in the world, but the biggest in terms of proximity to a human settlement. And the issue with that is the dust that flies up into the air and is not contained by those mines in the processes, and also the fact that they are planning to build mines on the headwaters of rivers and blocking up springs with concrete and so on. So potentially the damage to our rivers and our air is causing massive health issues for people. The dust is full of toxic heavy metals such as copper, selenium, lead, and it's getting into people's water tanks around here. And so I feel like human rights must come in these situations where most people probably think they're environmental issues, not necessarily concerning the humans, but they are directly impacting friends of mine around here. And of course, these issues with mines happen all over the place, all over Australia and the rest of the world.
Well, currently, people that have been trafficked, whether through forced labour or forced marriage, don't have a lot of legal protection. But I had a look at the Modern Slavery Act of 2018, and it references a whole lot of international, United Nations international conventions, which Australia is party to in some respects. So we're caught in some ways we're caught in no man's land around human rights, I think. So I think it would give a much more secure and focused approach to our ministry. We'd have something to hang our concerns and our advocacy and companionship, all of that on.
It's a foundation piece, Cynthia, I think, from our perspective. Now, there's a new Aged Care Act that's hopefully coming in 2024, and it's going to be person-centred, which is wonderful. It's going to have a lot of those elements in it. The fear, I suppose, long-term as we build an aged care infrastructure in Australia is that those things are never watered down, and a Human Rights Act is the only thing that can ensure that that is there, not just with this parliament, but for the parliaments to come. And because from a Commonwealth perspective, aged care is vastly funded by the Commonwealth, having that underpinning will mean the Health Minister, the Aged Care Minister, will never be able to water down that legislation without a real fight. And I think that's the real essence of what it is for us as an aged care provider, but for the whole sector as well.
Well, the first thing that came to mind was definitely my ministry with people seeking asylum and the discriminatory way that they were incarcerated and still are in some cases, and prevented from applying for visas because of their method of arrival to Australia by boat in general. And I've walked alongside many people who've spent many years in detention when they were not actually accused of anything illegal under international law, and were released without having been shown to do anything illegal. So they were simply seeking asylum. And one particular man I worked with was over 11 and a half years incarcerated by the Australian government, and he was not a criminal. Another area I could really see a difference Human Rights Act could make is with the prison system. And I was been a chaplain in prisons for a number of years, and the incarceration of children down to 10 years old, it has been in some parts of Australia, and particularly Aboriginal children. I'm currently in about 3/4 of the population where I live is Aboriginal, mostly Barkindji, and there's been too much incarceration in families. It becomes a generational thing, and it's the easy solution seen often for policing and for a simple government solution that sounds really great and can be published to the people that we're dealing with an issue by putting people in prison, but actually it can just prolong issues and make them worse and criminalise people, because once in the prison system, it's very hard to leave.
It is an interesting question around the Australia-wide Human Rights Act. My experience of the Human Rights Act is the Victorian Charter of Human Rights, which I think, if I remember correctly, was around 2006. Now, I could be mistaken with that date. And one of the really important things that happened at that time was a very comprehensive roadshow on what this act meant. Since then, I think possibly people newer to our sectors are less familiar with the Charter of Human Rights and don't necessarily think of it or see it as an assistance to their jobs. And what I do see is that every politician, every law that gets made in Victoria has to have a compatibility statement with the Charter of Human Rights. So that means that at a very minimum, our lawmakers are thinking about human rights in relation to the laws that are made. And I think that is a very good thing. It hasn't stopped homelessness. It hasn't stopped family violence. We know that Australia is signatory to international conventions, and they can get away with not abiding to the provisions in those mechanisms because they haven't implemented it into domestic law. I think the big difference at a Charter of Human Rights in Australia would mean that more of the international obligations would be converted into domestic law, which then is required to be obeyed by our local, state and federal governments. That would be the biggest difference.
If it was implemented, I think it would help to put fundamental human rights principles into law, providing that legal framework for promoting and protecting the human rights across various sectors, including social services like those provided by Mercy Connect. while it wouldn't necessarily change what we do on a day-to-day basis, it would definitely create legal protections for not only people living with disability, but of course all Australians. As is evidenced by the recent Disability Royal Commission, people's human rights were abused and even ignored in so many cases. So a Human Rights Act would help to reduce these atrocities that we heard about through the submissions presented to the Commission. And Mercy Connect, on behalf of our participants, we do often have to navigate inequities in a number of mainstream services, such as health and mental health. And I believe if this bill were to be passed, there would be clearer channels and protections of rights, particularly for those most vulnerable, promoting a culture of respect for human dignity and equality. And overall, a Human Rights Act in Australia would likely strengthen the work of organisations like Mercy Connect by embedding human rights into law. So in essence, really, human rights are the foundation of a just and humane society, providing a framework for promoting human dignity, equality and well-being for all. And so it's really crucial that the people that Mercy Connect support have a voice in order to live a connected, meaningful and inclusive life that is safe from harm and inequity.
So when it comes to things like people whose rights are not being respected, the critical thing that a Human Rights Act does, it provides an avenue to say, I haven't had my right to dignified treatment respected. You have something you can turn to take action when that right's been breached. So it doesn't mean that suddenly the Human Rights Act federalism is over. Like, there'll still be states and territories. There'll still be a need for state and territory human rights acts because the National Human Rights Act we're talking about is covering the federal arena. But we also think that having a federal Human Rights Act not only is important for federal laws in and of itself and services and policies and the like, but also will provide an example for the states and territories that don't have a Human Rights Act or Human Rights Charter to adopt one. Enforceable human rights standards benefit everyone across the community so that everyone can enjoy their human rights, like being able to have a quality education for every child, regardless of postcode, everyone being able to get quality healthcare regardless of their bank balance. And that can be achieved through having a Human Rights Act.
I believe that even amid today's mortar bursts and whining bullets, there is still hope for a brighter tomorrow.
The data shows the stats are only getting bigger. We're dying younger. We're being incarcerated more. Our kids are being removed more. Everything, every practice they've got around it is unsustainable. And we can rebuild, but we have to systemize it. We have to measure it, and we have to show that communities have to own it.
There's still a lot to do. Women's rights, the rights of refugees, the rights of people of colour, people with disabilities, all of these categories, they're on the edge and they need the support of a document like the Universal Declaration. It's a banner. It's a banner under which we should all be marching in order to ensure that no one is left behind.
It's really important that if we as a country are trying to say, hey, we are a really fair country, that we actually support efforts to try and make it as fair as possible for everyone.
When we can treat refugees as inhuman and simply not grant them the basic rights under international law, it means there's no baseline, there's actually no limit to how we can treat anyone, and that includes each other. And that's dangerous.
To deny any person their human rights is to challenge their very humanity.
If we don't get that greater entrenchment of rights, what we will find in 5 years, 10 years, is a whole slew of royal commissions again, after thousands and thousands of people's lives have been seriously affected by poor decisions or badly designed policies that have not had human rights at their centre.
If we observe these rights for ourselves and for others, I think we will find that it is easier in the world to build peace.
Anniversaries are always good to remember. They are a moment to reflect. Have we failed? Have we done well? Have we just tracked along nicely? But using it as an opportunity to say, let's do better. Let's capture those ideas, make them much more part of our fabric of law, and inform what I describe as rights-mindedness. Let's build that rights-mindedness of people right across our fine nation to understand, appreciate, and respect the human rights, to understand their own human rights, but also to respect the human rights of others.
To stop, think, and consider other people, accept them, try to understand them. It will be a big step forward if we can achieve that.
One thing that 75 years has confirmed that we can't let up.
So each person within Australia whose rights are breached and, as we would say, are not treated free and equal, means that none of us ultimately are.
On the 15th of March 2023, a parliamentary inquiry into Australia's human rights framework commenced. There were thousands of submissions sent to the inquiry, and nearly 90% of those submissions were in support of a Human Rights Act. And on 30 May this year, the inquiry handed down their report, including the one recommendation many were hoping for. The Parliamentary Joint Committee on Human Rights recommended for Parliament to legislate a Human Rights Act. But that's not the end of the story. We still need our current government to agree to that recommendation and to commit to legislating a Human Rights Act. To get them to commit, it means that members of Parliament need to hear that their constituents support a Human Rights Act and want them to legislate one. So if you are an Australian and you care about a fair and just society and you want to help prevent human rights violations and foster a culture of understanding and respecting human rights, then I urge you to contact your local Member of Parliament and tell them that you support a Human Rights Act now. But to all the other citizens of the world, I would like to put this question to you. How are your human rights protected? Does your country have a Human Rights Act? Together, we can create a fairer future, a future where all our human rights are protected under federal law. Thank you.
Cynthia, thank you for an amazing presentation and the way you've brought so many voices from Australia, especially Mercy voices, into the room to advocate for a federal Human Rights Act. Thank you very much. Now I'll open up the floor for questions. Please state your name and your country.
Hi, I'm Andrea from the United States. My question is there anything written right now that would be a Human Rights Act, or where's Australia in the process?
Great, thank you. Yes, you would have seen Danny Fadul. He was mentioned in the video twice, and he's the campaign manager. So he's part of the Human Rights Law Centre, and in conjunction, he at the Human Rights Law Centre, in conjunction with the Human Rights Commission, have actually developed the draft. It's ready to go. We just need our politicians to actually step up and make that decision. Thank you.
Questions in the room? Do we have any online? Not yet. Go ahead, yes.
We have a question from Isabel Salter from Australia, who was asking, what is the reluctance from politicians to actually stand up and enact a Human Rights Act? Where does it come from?
I don't really know. Like it is so simple and so obvious, and this campaign has been going on for quite some time, that you would think that they would just do it. There is a sense of nervousness around if we did actually legislate and have a Human Rights Act, is that limiting? You know, does that actually box it in? But the answer is no. You know, it is not an argument. You know, to do nothing is not a valid argument. And so I don't know. I just hope that our politicians actually hear the voice and that we can encourage more and more Australians to sign up to the campaign and, you know, and get this through the last hurdle. Mm.
Margaret Daly, Dublin. Cynthia, I wonder just how much was based on economics, that if the law is enacted, that it will put, you know, often it goes back to money. Is that a fair question or observation? That it, you know, that the obligations following the enactment of the law would cost?
Well, it hasn't been the case, certainly, in the states that do have one, in particular, for example, Victoria. It just means that when we do have one in Victoria, it just means that any other piece of legislation or decision actually has to complement that. It has to take that into consideration. So no, it shouldn't cost extra. It is just being mindful to what other legislation exists and keeping the rights of Australians at the centre of any decision making. Thank you.
Hi, Angela Reid, Mercy Global Action. Thank you so much, Cynthia. I learnt so much from your presentation and I found it really compelling. I wonder if you can tell me what would be the outcome for that 10-year-old incarcerated in a prison if we were to have a Human Rights Act in Australia?
Thank you. Yes, that story is definitely heartbreaking. So that 10-year-old that was incarcerated, he did go off to a juvenile detention. But then when that got full, he then got moved to an adult prison. And so as we saw in the example, that many others in the states where we don't have a Human Rights Act embedded, they just stay imprisoned. And really, in my opinion, it's a form of torture. That they are incarcerated, they are treated, you know, they are put in chains, they are, you know, 20 hours or more, you know, left in solitary confinement. So, but if we have a Human Rights Act, then actually we can actually fight for that injustice and get them removed and back into a facility with the support network, so access to education, that they can actually achieve that. So, yes, we need it to happen so that this actually stops. If they're not going to raise the age, then we need to protect our children other ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Jo from the UK. Cynthia, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation. I think mine is sort of an observation and a kind of question. I just, you know, I would say everyone in this room is so passionate about human rights, and that your presentation is so wonderful to kind of get the message out there for those who don't really understand. You know, my country, when we left the European Union, after the referendum, there was like the biggest Google search was, what is the EU? And so, you know, people were blindly voting. And I think, you know, projects like this where, you know, people are really understanding what human rights mean in a practical way is so important. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jo. I agree. Just raising the awareness across the community, what is a human rights, and it's not scary. It is not anything that will cost more money. It is not. It's just making sure that our legislation and our politicians actually make good decisions that actually benefit every Australian. So thank you.
Yeah, I love the idea that a charter or an act would help, would force legislators to report on how a new law would jive or not with the human rights standards. We have a Zoom question.
So we have two more Zoom questions, so I'll ask them together and you can respond as you wish. Hilda Cruz from Mexico asks, other than contacting your local MP, how can people push our politicians to adopt the draft? And secondly, Kathy Ketchell asks, has anyone or any human rights agencies in Australia organised an online petition to politicians?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to both questions, because they're very important. So yes, there is an online campaign and an online template, and there's a wealth of information out there, and you can visit charterofrights.org.au is the place to go. That's a campaign. They also have templates of being able to contact your local member of parliament. If you can't contact your local member of parliament, as in Hilda's question, then you join the campaign. You put your voice to those other many, hundreds of thousands of people, and you make it loud, and you just say, this is not good enough. Our government needs to step up. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Well, with that, I want to congratulate you. Thank you for fueling a fantastic discussion and challenging us to think about our own national situations in terms of human rights. Please join me in congratulating Cynthia. And we will be back at the top of the hour for our next presentation.